All right, listen, let's wrap up with this Gallup survey. The number of Americans who say it's a good time to buy a house has never been lower. 21% say it's a good time to buy a house, down 9% from the prior low of a year ago. Prior to 2022, 50% or more consistently thought it was a good time to buy. Significantly fewer expect local housing prices to increase in the year. Hey, Sachs, is this like a predictive of a bottom and pure capitulation, and then that means maybe it is in fact a good time? How would you read this data?
I don't see it as a bottom necessarily. The way I read the data is that the spike in interest rates have made it very unaffordable to buy a house right now. You've got, the mortgages are like 7% interest rate or even slightly higher. So people just can't afford the same level of house that they did before. I mean, mortgages were at 3.5% like a year and a half ago. Now, I think what's kind of interesting is that even in the 1980s, the early 1980s, when interest rates were at like 15%, you still had 50% thought it was an okay time to buy a house or an attractive time to buy a house. So for the number to be this low tells me that it's not just about interest rates. I think consumer confidence is also plummeting and people are feeling more insecure. So I think it's just another economic indicator that things are looking really shaky right now. And I'll tell you, one of the knock-on effects of this is going to be that people can't move, because in order to move, you have to sell your current house and then buy a new one. And you're not going to want to sell your current house when prices are going down. And then for the new one, you're going to lose your 3% mortgage and have to get a new one at 7%. So you're not going to be able to buy anything like the house you currently have. So it freezes the market. It freezes mobility. I think over the last few years during COVID, you saw tremendous movement between states. I think that's going to slow down a lot now because people just can't afford to trade houses. So as a result of that, I think discontent is going to rise, because I think one of the ways that you create a pressure valve is when people are unhappy in a state, they just move somewhere else. Well, now they're not going to be able to do that.
Well, and you can also move to a better opportunity for you and your family, whether that's schools, taxes, a job, lifestyle. So yeah, you're going to reduce joy in the country. And it screws with price discovery, doesn't it, Chamath? If you don't have a fluid market here, then how does anybody know what their house is worth? And this just, again, creates more of a frost.
I think Friedberg has said this a couple times. Friedberg, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like the home is like the disproportionate majority of most Americans' wealth, right?
Mm-hmm. It's all their wealth.
All their wealth, yeah. So, I mean, there's that factoid.
Yeah. And then what does that do for their savings or whatever? Yeah, it's okay. You got incoming? What's going on? They're bringing you your lunch?
No, I was looking at
what are you looking at? Be honest.
Mansion that's for sale. It's like $175 million, but they just cut the price to $140. So I'm just taking a little gander.
I mean,
there's going to be a lot of distress in the market soon. I'm predicting a lot of distress. Actually, can we shift to the commercial side for a second?
Sam Zell just passed away. Yeah.
Sam Zell passed away
today.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Rest in peace. Yeah.
Rest in peace. Chicago. Crazy.
But speaking of
bombastic, interesting guy.
Yeah. But speaking of the real estate market, so I want to give an update on San Francisco CRE. I was talking to a broker the other day. Mm-hmm. And so here are the stats that they gave me. So it was a local broker and then someone from Blackstone, and they're fans of the pod and just came up to me and we started talking about what's happening in San Francisco.
Did you take a selfie?
Shout out to them. Didn't take a photo, but in any event, they're fans of the pod. So we started talking about what's happening in San Francisco real estate. So the SF office market is just a level set is 90 million square feet. They said the vacancy rate is now 35%. So that's over 30 million square feet vacant, and vacancy still growing as leases end and companies shed space because some of that space that they're not using is not up for sublease. Everyone says, what about AI? Is AI going to be the savior? The problem is that AI companies that's only about 1 million square feet of demand. So 1 million out of 30 million is going to be absorbed by AI. And maybe that number grows over time over the next 5-10 years as we create some really big AI companies, but it's just not going to bail out San Francisco right now. The other thing is that, VC-backed startups are very demanding in terms of their tenant improvements, and landlords don't really have the capital right now to put that into the buildings. And startups just are not the kind of credit-worthy tenants that landlords really want. So this is not going to bail anybody out. They said there are a ton of zombie office towers, especially in Soma. And all these office towers are eventually going to be owned by the banks, which are going to have to liquidate them. And then we're going to find out that these loans that they made are going to have to be written off because the collateral that they thought was blue chip that was backing up those loans is not so blue chip anymore. So I think we've got not just a huge commercial real estate problem, but it's going to be a big banking problem as basically people stop pretending. Right now they're trying to restructure loans. It's called pretend and extend. You reduce the rate on the loan, but add term to it. But that only works for so long. If this keeps going, if the market keeps looking like this, I think we're going to have a real problem. And that will be a problem in the banking system. Now, San Francisco is the worst of the worst, but they said that New York is similar. And all these other big cities with empty office towers are directionally the same.
I'm in New York right now for the iConnections conference, and it is packed. The city is packed. Getting anywhere, there's gridlock. You can't walk down the street. You got to walk around people. Every restaurant. It is dynamic. And then I talked to people about offices, and they said people are staying in their houses, in their tiny little New York apartments, instead of going 3 train stops to their office. They go to the office 1 or 2 days a week, unless you're like JP Morgan or some other places that drop the boom. But there's a lot of people still working from home. The finance people have all gone back. Media people are starting to go back. So there are 3 to 5 days here, and the city is booming. Contrast that, I spent the last 2 weeks in San Francisco, walking from Soma to the Embarcadero back, dead. Nobody in the city. Like literally a ghost town.
It's a real shame.
It's a real shame. I wonder if this is the question I have for you, Sachs. Can they cut a deal? Can they go to like month-to-month rents, sublets, loosey-goosey, just give people any dollar amount to convince them to come back? Is there any dollar amount? Because I'm looking for a space for the incubator in San Mateo. I've been getting a ton of inbound, but the prices are still really high. And I'm like, how do I cut a deal here? Because shouldn't people be lowering the prices dramatically, or are they all just pretending, or will I get a lower?
Rents are definitely coming down big time, especially for space that's sort of commodity and not that desirable. But what's happening is, according to the people I talk to, is that the demand, the people who actually are looking for new space, they only want to be in the best areas, and they want to be in the newest buildings that have the best amenities. And so that sort of commodity office tower where there's barely anybody ever there, like no one wants that. So I think people would rather pay a higher rent. I mean, the rent will still be much lower, probably half the price of what it used to be, but they'd rather pay a little bit more for that than get like a zombie office tower.
We can't talk about all this without talking about 2 cases. Tragically, a shoplifter, a criminal who was stealing from a drugstore in San Francisco, got shot. And the video was released. I'm sure you've seen it, Sachs. And then here in New York, everybody's talking about this one instance of a Marine trying to subdue a violent homeless person with 2 other people. And it's on everybody's minds here. And Brooke Jenkins is not prosecuting in San Francisco the shooter. They look like, a clean shoot, as they would say in the police business, an appropriate, and it's tragic to say this, but the person did charge the security guard. The security guard did fear for their life and shot him. So Brooke Jenkins is not going to pursue anything. But in New York City, they're pursuing manslaughter for the person who did seem a bit excessive from the video. It's hard to tell what the reality is in these situations. Any thoughts on it, David? These 2 cases in 2 cities, tell 2 cities.
Yeah, look, I mean, the only time you can get a Soros DA excited about prosecuting someone is when they act in self-defense or defense of others. I mean, this Marine, I guess Daniel Penny is his name, he was acting in defense of others. The person who he stopped was someone with an extensive criminal record who had just recently engaged in an attempted kidnapping, who had punched elderly people, had
pretty gnarly track record,
dozens of arrests. In fact, people on Reddit were talking about how dangerous this person was. Apparently, a dozen years ago or so, he was seen as more of like a quirky, like Michael Jackson impersonator.
Street
performer. But something happened. This is according to a Reddit post that I saw, where something happened and there was some sort of psychological break. And then since then, he's had dozens and dozens of crimes, and they just keep letting him loose through this revolving door of a justice system we have. And now, look, no one likes to see him basically dying. And yeah, it's too bad. It's horrible that happened.
Tragic.
I don't know, though, that if you're trying to stop someone, I don't know how easy it is to precisely control whether you use too much force or not. So I think Daniel Penny has a strong case that he was acting in self-defense and defense of others.
And there were 2 other people, by the way, who were holding this person down.
There were 3 of them restraining him.
And what universally New Yorkers said to me, of all different backgrounds, was this is not a race issue. The other, I think 1 or 2 of the other people were people of color. It was not a race issue, and they're trying to make it into a race issue in both these cases. And this is literally what happens. It just, having been through this in New York in the 70s and 80s, when you do
Sorry,
not...
who's they? Who's they when you say trying to make it a race issue?
There are a bunch of protests on the street, both in San Francisco and New York, people protesting these as, justice issues. The fact is, if you allow lawlessness for too long a period of time, you get a Bernie Getz situation. And Bernie Getz, people can look it up in the 80s. I was a kid when it happened, but they tried to mug somebody. He had a gun. He shot him. And this is what happens if you allow lawlessness for extended periods of time. It's just, you're basically gambling.
And what happened to Bernie Getz?
He got
not guilty.
He got not guilty, but I think he had an illegal gun, so he was guilty of that. The Bernie Getz thing was really crazy because at the time, the climate in New York in this 1984 shooting, there was a portion of people who, I don't want to say they made him a hero, but they made it this is what happens if you allow us to be assaulted forever. We're going to fight back at some point. That was the vibe in New York when I was a child. I was 14, 15 years old when this happened. He was charged with attempted murder, assault, reckless
Jason,
endangerment.
what was the name of that vigilante group that used to walk the streets? The Something Angels?
That was the Guardian
Angels, right? Guardian Angels.
So it was so bad in the 80s. And I actually almost signed up for the Guardian Angels. I went to their headquarters because I was practicing martial arts and I thought I would check it out. And they had their office in Hell's Kitchen. I didn't wind up joining. But what they would do is they would just ride the subway. They would wear a certain type of hat and wear a Guardian Angel shirt. And all they did was just ride the subways, a red beret, and they would just ride the subways. And you felt safe.
What kind of martial arts were you taking?
Taekwondo. I was in Taekwondo, yeah. This is before mixed martial arts, but they just rode the subways. And honestly, I've been on the subways with them many times. You felt safe. And it wasn't vigilantes. They were guardian angels. They used that term. And many times they would do exactly what this Marine did, which is try to subdue somebody who was committing crime. I had 2 distinct instances where people tried to mug me, riding the subways in New York in the 80s. 2 distinct times. And one was a group of people and one was one person. It was pretty scary. Both times I navigated it, but it was, not pleasant in the 80s in New York.
Can I say one more thing about this Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely case? So look, at the end of the day, this is going to be litigated. I don't know all the details. They're going to have to litigate whether Daniel Penny's use of force was excessive or not. But here's the thing, is that the media has been falsely representing Jordan Neely by only posting 10-year-old photos of him and leaving out crucial information. This was a press report. So again, this is why I mentioned the whole Michael Jackson impersonator thing, is that the media keeps portraying Neely as this innocent, harmless guy who is this delightful Michael Jackson impersonator. In truth, he hasn't done that in more than a decade because, again, he had some sort of mental break. And since then, he's been arrested over 40 times, including for attempting to kidnap a 7-year-old child.
Oof.
And so the media is not portraying this case, I think, in an accurate way. And I think as a result of that, it leads to pressure on the DA to prosecute someone who has, I think, a strong self-defense claim. Or, maybe the DA just wants to do this anyway. And it gives the DA cover to do this.
Soros is, I know that we had this back and forth with this.
But why is CNN being inaccurate, do you think, Sachs?
They're basically cooperating with Alvin Bragg's interpretation of the case. And they're trying to make the case against Penny look as damning as possible.
Yeah, why don't they just take it straight down the middle? It's a tragedy. We have a screwed up situation here. We got a mental health crisis. And it's a tragedy for everybody involved. On the Bernie Getz stuff, he served 8 of a 12-month sentence for the firearm charge. And he had a massive $43 million civil judgment against him in 1996, a decade later. It's just...
This is a little different than the Getz thing, because pulling out a gun and shooting somebody
that's deadly intent. Yeah,
that's a huge escalation here. Whereas Penny, he's a trained Marine, right?
He's trying to immobilize him.
He has to believe that he's just trying to subdue Neely. And so he's not using a chokehold to kill him. That's an unfortunate consequence of what happened. But he was trying to restrain the guy. As far as we know, right? As far as we know.
Yeah, I mean, tragedies all around. We got to have law and order. I tweeted, like, I don't know why we still have the post office. Maybe we could make that like once a week and redo all of that space and allow every American who's suffering from mental illness to check in to what used to be the post office, you know, maybe like once a week. And obviously you can give those people very gentle landings, but I don't think we need postal service more than once or twice a week. And then let's reallocate some money towards mental health in this country, where anybody who's sick, who feels like they're violent or feels like they're suicidal, can just go into a publicly provided facility and say, I'm a sick person, please help me. This would solve a lot of problems in society. We've got a mental health crisis. We should provide mental health services to all Americans. And it's an obviously easy thing for us to afford to do.
And if we had done that, then this never would have happened.
Exactly. I mean, literally, you have Sachs, who wants to balance the budget, saying, hey, this is something worth spending on. We can all agree on this.
Compared to the impact on society, I don't think it'd be a huge expense.
We would save money. We'd save money because a city like San Francisco could become quite livable, or New York. And then, God forbid, these terrible school shootings, you know, if you avoid even one of them, it's 30 people's lives or 10 people's lives. So it's
Jacob, we don't
well
need
worth
to
it.
convert post offices. What we need to do is stand up scaled shelters, and it doesn't need to be done on the most expensive land in a given city.
Do it outside of cities. Why does there is no expectation in Europe for like Paris or London to be affordable, or Hong Kong to be affordable. There are affordable places 30 minutes outside of those places where you could put these facilities. I just want to ask one question to Sachs, because I don't know, and I know Sachs is a little bit deeper into this than I am. What is George Soros's motivation for putting in these lawless, insane DAs? Like, I understand that he was able to buy them. They're low cost. Yes. There's not a lot of money in them. Okay, I understand that. That's table stakes. But what is his actual motivation for causing chaos in cities?
Listen, we can't know exactly what his motivation is, but what he did is he went into cities where he doesn't live and flooded the zone with money to get his preferred candidate elected as DA. Now, the reason he did that was to change the law. And the way that he changed the law was not through legislatures, the way you're supposed to operate, but rather by abusing prosecutorial discretion. So in other words, once he gets his Soros DA elected, they can change the law by deciding what to prosecute and what not to prosecute.
Right.
And that's why there is so much lawlessness in these cities.
But there's a better path, you're saying.
Yeah, but look, this is not the only way that Soros has, I'd say, imposed his values on cities that he doesn't even live in.
Where does he live?
I think he's a New York guy, but I'm not sure. But he's gone far beyond that, obviously, in these elections. But also, he's done this across the world. Soros has this thing called the Open Societies Foundation, which sounds like it's spreading democracy and liberal values, but in fact is fomenting regime change all over the world. And he's been sponsoring and funding color revolutions all over the world. Now, if you like some of the values he's spreading, then maybe you think that's a good thing. But I can tell you that the way this is perceived by all these countries all over the world is it creates tremendous dissension and conflict. And then they look at America and they basically say, you know, this American billionaire is coming into our country and he's funding regime change. And it makes America look bad. Now, he's doing this, I think, with the cooperation of our State Department in a lot of cases, and maybe the CIA, I don't know. But this is why America, frankly, is hated all over the world, is we go running around meddling in the internal affairs of all these countries.
He's 92. Is this guy all there? Like, that was the other thing I heard, is that he's not all there, and that people around him are doing these kind of things in his organizations.
I heard something similar, is that it's the idiot's son, Alexander, who's really now pulling the strings.
Why don't we have them at All In Summit? Would you allow Soros to speak at All In Summit? Would you interview?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's have Soros or his son, and they could explain themselves. If they're so proud of this work.
Well, apparently, there is an article that Alexander Soros has visited the White House like 24 times during the Biden presidency. This is an extremely powerful and connected person.